Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fire Emblem Heroes Hall of Fame. Today we're going to be taking a look at the most culturally significant, most impactful, most meta-defining releases of all time in the history of this game. So, probably going to be a long one, so grab your hot chocolates if you're down for some serious FEH discussion about the past, and we'll eventually get to the present, but we're going to start things off real nice and easy. We're going to take a look at Book 1, and these are my picks for the most impactful, most defining releases of the first book of this game. So we're starting things off with Hector, of course, needs no introduction. Everybody knows the story. Day one, some dude dropped like 10 grand on the game trying to summon Hector off focus just because of how good he was, and I think the guy eventually did get Hector. But that's one of the examples of what you don't want to do in a gacha game, is go hard for a non-focus unit. If you're just drawing at straws hoping to get lucky, that's probably not going to go too well. So we go ahead and take a look at his base kit here. Now, we'd actually take the effect off, because that didn't exist back in the day. This was his base kit. He's got not even Berserk Armads. He actually just had Armads regular. He had Pavis, he had Distant Counter, and then he had Gold Armor. So, what was it about this guy that made him so impactful at the time? Well, it's Distant Counter, pretty much. There were only a handful of units that had the ability to counterattack from any range. Hector was one of them. There was also Takumi, who had Close Counter. There were a couple of dragons that had Lightning Breath, like Naui and Adult Tiki. And I think Ryoma as well, he had built-in Distant Counter on his weapon. But outside of those five, that was pretty much it. Like, there weren't really any other units that had the ability to counterattack from anywhere. So being able to do that, especially early on in the game's life, before skill fodder was even a thing, before you could inherit skills on other units, this was a really big deal. So Hector, of course, cements himself in the FEH Hall of Fame. We also have, of course, Brave Lyn, part of the original Brave Banner, and one of the most meta-defining units of all time. We can go ahead and take a look at her base kit real quick. Now, of course, she didn't have all of this stuff at the time. All she had was Mula Gear, and then her base kit right here, which Swift Sparrow 2, pretty good player phase skill. But what really made Lyn devastating was this right here, her beast skill. It essentially gave her fire sweep against enemies that had physical attacking weapons. So swords, lances, axes, and I believe also bows and daggers, but it may have only been swords, axes, and lances. Which, regardless, I mean, that's still perfectly fine. Fire Sweep was one of the most disgusting effects early on in the game, especially when we had no counterplay to it, because there was no Null Sea Disrupt at that point in time. So, Lyn, of course, was a very dominating unit for quite some time, and she also had the pinnacle of range back then, too. She was a cavalry type with a ranged weapon, so not too many ways to get around her. We also have Reinhardt, of course, Thunder Fist with his baby hands. So Reinhardt, even to this day, they fear the power that Reinhardt brings. They know that magic is everything, and that's why this guy still has no refine. I can't even tell you why. Like, is he that threatening? It's not even that he's threatening anymore. It's mainly just the PTSD, I guess, that Insys has from what happened when this guy was on top, right? Because he was a demoted hero. He was one of the original demoted heroes. You could get him as a 4-star, and for a 4-star to be as good as he was, I think they didn't intend for that to be the case. What you would do once skill fodder came along, you would just give this guy Death Blow, and the rest really didn't matter. I mean, he has Gold Cav, which is already pretty good, but you could also give him, like, Hone Cavalry instead, or Fortify Cavalry, or whatever. Have him set up on a Cav Ball, and just get +6 to all stats, and then he was cooking. Like, nothing else really needs to be said. Brave attacking with magic, back then when a lot of units had low res, was a pretty big deal. He was a very popular merge project. A lot of people went for the +10 on him, and I don't think anything else needs to be said. You all know, he's the meme lord for a reason. Okay, next up we have Ira. More so not because of how impactful of a unit she was, but rather how impactful her release was. Everyone and their mama who's played Fire Emblem Heroes has heard of Iragate, the dreaded Iragate. Ooh, we're bringing up some real old wounds here. Now, Irrigate was something that I don't think any gacha would ever do in their entire life. Like, they wouldn't even dream of doing what they did with Ira in this game. So they shadow dropped her, basically. First of all, they had the trailer, which included the first well, not the first, but they had a bunch of Jugdral units on the banner. They had Sigurd, they had Deirdre, they had Eldigan, and I think it was Lachesis. So that was the 4 units on the banner. Little did we know Ira was actually also a planned release at the time, and they made no mention of her anywhere at all. No official sources whatsoever. All we had was the data mine knowing that she was coming, and that's not really an official source. Like a data mine, like, come on, they have to announce it themselves. So a lot of us were actually even thinking she might have been the Tempest Trial prize unit. That's not what ended up happening, of course. She ended up dropping on the Tempest Trial banner as a color-shared unit with Eldigan. So it was really gross the way that they handled her release. If you wanted to get her, you had to go through Eldigan first, and they deliberately held her back from the actual Jugdral banner by not having her color share with Sigurd, who was obviously another popular character from Fire Emblem 4. So they, for whatever reason, they didn't want to allow us to get Ira and Sigurd on the same banner. Can't tell me why that is the case. Only Insys knows. Okay, and then finally, we've got Nino over here. Good old Nino, doing her best, of course. Maybe not so much anymore. Or her best just isn't good enough, sadly. But if we take a look at what she'd had back in the day, I mean, she had Grondblade. She didn't have Iris's tome yet. But Grondblade was the pinnacle of DPS, and not just Grondblade, but all of the Blade tomes. So Blarblade and Router Blade, all of those were just really good. More so, I would say more so on like cavalry and flyer types as opposed to infantry, because it was really hard to get +6 to all stats on infantry back then, because Hone Attack was like the best. Hone Attack, Hone Speed, Fortify Speed, or Fortify Defense, Fortify Res. Those were the best C skills we had to buff stats for infantry. Whereas the cavalry and the flyers, they had Hone Armors, or Hone Flyers, Hone Calves, Fortify Calves, and so on and so forth. Even Armors had them, but it was pretty hard to move in with Armors. And there were also no Tome Armors on release day either. So those we ended up getting later on as seasonal types. But if you wanted to build an effective DPS team, the idea was to just give Grondblade or any of the Blade Tomes to your colored Tome units and then just stack up a bunch of stacks with them and have them just do a monstrous amount of damage. Nino, of course, very easy unit to get as well, so people were getting her up to +10. Same with Darja, she would be the other red tome that you would go for, and the blue tome was a little bit harder to come by, because Lindy, at the time, the 5-star Lindy, was the best blue tome infantry, but she was 5-star exclusive, and it wasn't very easy to get her. So people would improvise a little bit. They would go for Odin or someone else, or even the male Robin was a possible option back then. So just a bunch of random tome units were actually very dominant, just thanks to the power of Blade Tomes back in the day. So there we go for my main 5 for Book 1. Now, of course, we're going to take a look at some honorable mentions later once we finish, but we are, of course, leaving off a couple of very important guys, but I think these are the 5 most impactful. Okay, now we move on to Book 2. So, again, keeping up with the trend of Reinhardt, where a unit was just so devastating that Insys is getting their revenge by not releasing their refine. So Surtur, of course, the final boss of Book 2, which is pretty much the first actual book of Fire Emblem Heroes, because Book 1 was really just the preparations for the actual story to begin. And then once Book 2 started up, that's when things started to really get going here, because we had a bunch of OCs introduced, and we had the actual animations, like the book movies, and so on and so forth. We had recruitable OCs that we were getting, such as Fiorm and Lake Jarn, and so on and so forth. So Book 2 is really where the game got started, and Surtur, in true final boss fashion, I mean, this guy was a nightmare. They actually banned him from appearing as a NPC opponent from the computer. He still is banned, by the way. You cannot fight this guy in any map that spawns random opponents for whatever reason. Obviously now that wouldn't be that big of a deal, but back then, oh my god. He was so OP. Sin Mara especially, just doing 20 points of free damage at the start of turn to enemies in 2 spaces. This was an arena killer. Like, you had this guy at +10, you were just set for life in arena. Like me, for example, I got so many crowns with this guy, pretty much. Him and Legendary Tiki just carried me through Arena for years. Until eventually, a unit we're going to talk about later ruined everything. But up until that point, this guy was the guy. He was amazing everywhere. He was really good in Aether Raids as well. I was running him as a Gale Force option in Aether Raids, believe it or not, even though he's an armored type. He was just that good. Like, you could mix it up really well. No one had defense and res like this back then, or even like min-max speed at this level. So yeah, he was just really good. Very impactful unit there. Then we have Ophelia, who is pretty much the queen when it comes to player phase strats of the time. Now, she's got no refine as well. She is also just like Surtur and Reinhardt, where they're part of the Forgotten Trio for some reason. I don't know why, but they're not allowed to get refines. And I'm guessing it's because they're that impactful from back in the day that Insys is like, all right, these guys, we hate them. They allowed people to bully our games, so we're not giving them no refine. That's to spite them. So yeah, I mean, Ophelia's weapon allows her to cooldown reduce based on how many mages you've got. So she could just spam her AoE or any special you wanted, really. You could go for Luna or Glacies, even though her defense and res aren't that great. Or like Dragon Fang, I guess, would be an option. But really, you would just go for an AoE and just have her spam that over and over. Just run her with triple dancers, triple tome dancers at that, and just have her pretty much solo any map you ran into. That includes the abyssal maps that were really tough back in the day, and we actually needed like some crazy firepower to be able to plow through those. Ophelia was our girl for quite some time. She was a really nice option. Really good in Aether Raids as well. Part of infantry pulse defenses with rally traps and so on and so forth. This was a very, very meta-defining unit for quite some time. And really good for casual players too, because they could solo a lot of easy PvE content with her. So that's very good there. Okay, next up we've got Brave Veronica. Now, Brave Veronica didn't really get much in the way of refines here. Her refine was very lackluster. However, like we talked about earlier with Brave Lyn, she had the pinnacle of range, being a cavalry type with a ranged weapon. And on top of that, she also had the dreaded Dazzling Staff combo. So, being unable to answer attacks back in the day was insufferable. I can't even stress that enough. Just running into units like Brave Lyn, who would have... she would be packing heat, right? Like, she'd be running Poison Strike in the B slot. She'd be running, like, Savage Blow in the C slot and just doing so much ship damage that you had no way to answer. And she could... I mean, when it comes to Brave Lyn, you would just take Mulagir off and give her Fire Sweep Bow. One of the most broken and unfair weapons ever for inheritances. And you would combo her with Veronica, who would run Savage Blow, and it would just be a nightmare trying to tank that, because you can't counterattack them, and you're just constantly taking damage. Veronica even debuffs when she hits you. She inflicted all stats -4 on the target and foes in 2 spaces, and then buffed herself and allies in 2 spaces by all stats of 4. So, it was really annoying dealing with her and Lyn, both in Aether Raid's defense teams. And this was also back when Spring Breeze was really, really OP, when it had the 4 walls. So, yeah, just a testament of a much simpler time when you could get away with Fire Sweep and not have to worry. Okay, here's one for all of the free-to-play players. Aversa on release, oh my god, she was... I don't think it's a stretch to say she was basically the Marnie of back in the day. She might have even been more impactful than Marnie, too, if I think about it, really, because this unit is probably the most significant Grand Hero Battle unit to ever release, considering the time, of course, of release. So when she came out, everyone ran her. It didn't matter what you were doing. Like, Arena mode, you could just give her a Red Dual Flyer and just get her to +10, and she'd be great in Arena. Her debuff on a Versus Knight was insane. Just inflicting panic on the foes and then debuffing their stats. That was so crazy. We did not have debuffers like that back in the day. If you wanted to do panic, you had to run Panic Ploy, which was, to be honest, not a very good skill. But a Versus Knight, though, was a really good weapon with panic to enemies that are adjacent to each other, Then you do also all stats -3 and so on and so forth. So she found herself on a lot of teams. She's also a really nice option for damage because she has a good attack and speed combo, and being a flying type, she could move over mountain tiles and obstacles and so on. So this was a very, very impactful unit. And unless you were around back in the day, you probably wouldn't even realize it. But yeah, this unit was a killer. All right, and then finally we have the Fallen Banner, the very first one. Now, this one was actually probably the most viewed trailer that I think I've ever done for a video, like the trailer breakdown. We were not expecting this. Like, just to get a Fallen Banner with a bunch of evil characters, we never saw it coming. And to see it the first time with such great selections like this guy, we got Harden as well, and they both had Vengeful Fighter and Bold Fighter, which were finally being taken out of the seasonal pool. And if you guys know, Bold Fighter, back in the day, was the most overtuned skill ever. It wasn't until, like, Sturdy Blow, or was it Steady Blow, that I thought finally we had something better. Or not, what was it? Sturdy Impact, right? I don't know if he can get it, but yes, Sturdy Impact from Tibarn was the very first passive that I thought was maybe on Bold Fighter's level. And that was several months after this guy came out. So, and not even that too, because the Christmas banner from year one was the originator of Bold Fighter and Vengeful Fighter. So these guys were just bringing it to the regular pool. But we had actually had them prior on the Christmas seasonal banner. So, armored units, it was a time of armored units. It was a time of Bold Fighter being the most cracked passive ever, giving you a guaranteed follow-up when there was no null follow-up in existence. And also giving you special acceleration when stuff like Heavy Blade and Steady Breath were like two of the top options you could run for special ramping. How about just throw both of those things together? And there you go, you have Bold Fighter. So yeah, I mean, this very significant unit, very significant passives, and the banner itself. The Fallen Banner, I feel like, is one of the most popular banners that they do every year. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the hype surrounding the first Fallen Banner. That really set the tone for the future. So, very culturally significant unit. Definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Okay, now we're moving on to Book 3. Now, what's very interesting here is, of course, we started getting refines, and particularly refines for the Brave heroes. So, they did not disappoint. When this guy got his refine, oh my god. Probably my favorite unit ever to use back in the day. When he was on top, when he was the king of the meta, he was probably the best unit in the game, straight up, after his refine for quite some time. It took a significant overhaul of the way the game works for them to finally boot this guy out. But it was so satisfying being able to use him. He just wouldn't die. He had 80% damage reduction. He would force the enemies into hitting him twice in a row with Desperation. And then he just counters with an Ether to the face, heals off any damage he just took, and then blow the enemies up on the spot. So, yeah, very similar playstyle to Emblem Mike, who is existent right now. But try to imagine, like, back in the day when things were not this insane, like, units weren't coming with 80% damage reduction. You'd be lucky to have damage reduction at all back then. So, it's definitely a sign of the times, and he had very few counters. It was like Hardy Bearing and units that nullify DR, which there were only like 2 or 3 of them back then. So, Ike was very much an unstoppable force, and he paved the way for a lot of what we're seeing right now with units like Emblem Ike that are able to just stack DR like crazy and heal like crazy. The sustain is nuts. So yeah, he was really the blueprint for all of that. Now, funny enough, we talk about Brave Banner 1 getting their refines. That included this guy picking up Blazing Durandal from his son. And what's even crazier is that he ended up using this weapon better, despite being a 3-star demote. He was for quite some time the best demote hero in the game. He was only a 3-star, so you would easily be able to get him +10, unlike Roy, who had the same weapon. And if you take a look at their stat lines, Roy only has a couple more points of speed, like 3 more points of speed. And then this guy has significantly more res and not too much less defense. Roy does have better defense, but not by much. So, like, when you would combo that with Blazing Durandal, giving you, I think it was, which one was it? Is it Swift Impact or something like that? It gives you speed and defense up 10, or speed up 7, defense up 10, and then nullify the foe's follow-up. So that comboed really well with this guy's stat line, giving him the extra speed and defense, which rounded out his defense and res really nicely, gives him the impact effect. Then it also had built-in, essentially, like tempo, where you get special acceleration and you inflict guard on the foes. This was before a lot of units were able to do that. So having that built into a weapon on a Cav unit, no less, was really nuts. He was a really good Gale Forcer. He was really great in Aether Raids, where you could set up lunge traps and smack the enemies once, get them on a bolt trap, and then set up Wings of Mercy on the enemies too. Really dirty. Really brings me back to back in the day. But yeah, this guy really ate well from the most unexpected refine. Not even his own. He ate well from someone else's refine, which is crazy. Okay, next up, we've got our boy Legendary Eliwood, one of the better aging units ever. So this guy, I mean, you could even make the argument he's useful right now, even though not so much. We have better ways to get bonus doubler now than back then. But this guy was good for a very long time, and he was really good in summoner duels too for a very long time, which is unheard of. For a unit to be that old, even before he had his refine too. Like, people were just running him in SD because he could give that bonus doubler support. He gives a little bit of stats, and that's all that matters. Just unlimited range bonus doubler to your ally with the highest attack. That's really good. The only condition is that you need to have a dragon ally on the team or a beast ally, but that wasn't really that bad. Like, you could easily just slide in Ninian or some dragon dancer or beast dancer like the Herons, for example. So just a really great support. He aged way better than anyone ever expected just out of the support utility. And his refine was pretty good too for a while. Nowadays, like I said, we have better ways to get bonus doubler. But this guy was really holding it down well with the support back in the day. Alright, next up we have Legendary Azura, one of the most feared and dreaded units to appear in Aether Raids. So, like, she would dance an ally, and then she would just give them +1 movement. So, having rally and dance traps in AR when she released, you could just extend your reach. Have her dance on a unit that had a Blade Tome, and then the way her dance works, she gives all stats up 6, or all stats up 7 if you had Hone Attack 7 or Hone Speed 7 on her. So you would just end up getting +7 to all stats. Have the ally get an extra movement, and then clap them with a Blade Tome. So Azura was a very scary defensive dancer for a very long time. She's still good even right now. Just goes to show how well aged her kit ended up turning out here. And being a flyer, of course, she could fly over obstacles, and you could give her like Guidance 4 and stuff like that now. But man, back in the day. And then also to have a legendary hero dancer with a preference dance skill. So like she actually scores high enough. Regular dance and sing don't score very good. So yeah, enough said, right? Like, this unit was a very big mainstay for a very long time. And then finally, we have Altina. Now, this unit is kind of polarizing a little bit, because some people look at her fondly, and then others look at her like a complete waste. She ended up winning the Hero Rises event, which I was very happy about personally. I'm sure Oblivion was as well. But a lot of people really downplayed how effective this unit was. She was a very hard carry for Aether Raids. I loved using her. I didn't even think we would ever get Altina. Like, getting her in the game already was a stunner to me. And me being a Radiant Dawn fan, and of course, she only appears in one little cutscene, but I thought she was badass to the bone. So when we saw that trailer, when I saw her on the banner, I went nuts. That might have been the craziest banner reaction I ever had. So, very, very happy to get Altina into the game, and they did not disappoint. They made her really good. She's really strong. One of the first units that had an ability to nullify damage reduction. She had a brave attacking weapon with built-in distant counter. She was also a really good vantage tank as well at the time, but I was playing her more so as like a player phaser. People were running her as a Gale Forcer. You could do that too. So, just a very well-varied unit, and like I said, polarizing to the community because a lot of people were sleeping on her back then because she won a Hero Rises and they didn't think she was that good. But the people who knew, they knew. They knew she was badass. They knew she was good. So shout outs to anyone from back in the day that was using Altina and having a lot of success, like me, for example. All right, let's move on to Book 4 now. So we've got Brave Edelgard coming in first. Now, this was one of the first armored units to actually have legitimate mobility. This was before we've got, like, crazy nonsense that we got going on now, like Guidance 4 and so on and so forth, Charge, and now we even have the one from Sigurd, Gallop, that can give you +2 movement. Before all of that stuff existed, Edelgard had +1 movement, and she could warp to allies. That was unheard of. Nobody was doing that. No armored unit, especially, was doing stuff like that. And then to top it off, she was like an armored Brave Ike, essentially. She had 80% DR on the enemy's follow-up attack and further attacks. She had -1 special trigger on her weapon, so you could easily run a bunch of different specials. She's really good offensively, and it's also pretty significant, too, just the release of Brave 4, because I feel like that was the most popular time in the game's history, when we just got a bunch of units from 3 houses for the first time. 3 houses was actually the latest game, believe it or not. So, feels like a million years since that happened. But yeah, Book 4 definitely feels like the height of FE's popularity in terms of how many people were playing, and just like the game wasn't like super out of whack back then. There was power creep, but it wasn't like obscene like it is right now. So there was still a lot of enjoyment. People were having fun with their favorites still, and Edelgard is still pretty good even right now. Maybe she's not the best, but she's certainly not doing too shabby. So definitely a significant unit. Now we have, this may be my favorite unit ever. I remember when she came out. Oh my god. Bride Micaiah. I don't think I've ever had as much fun using a unit as I had when I used her. She was so silly. You could take level 1 units and kill level 40 units. I think Zeshato might have been the one who showed that off. He had like a level 1 Laszlo destroy a level 40 Brave Dimitri with the dominant support from this Micaiah. So, yeah, like, this really was the unit that made Duo's Hindrance a mandatory setup on your defense teams, because otherwise you would just get blown to smithereens. She'd pop that Duo skill, it's like the I win button, and then you just win the game. There was no stopping it. Any Brave attack unit would go nuts with this, like Altina, for example, or really any Brave attacker or any Vantage attacker would have just ate so well off of that dominance and did exactly as told, dominate the enemies. She's also a high-scoring unit, of course, being a duo hero. Artwork selection, I thought was pretty good. She looks great. I don't know about so too much, but I think Micaiah and Yune look pretty good there. And effective against armor and cav, too, pretty nice. Sacrifice, once again, being a flying colorless tome was also pretty rare. You could run her, too, as an Aether Raid's carry, kinda. Like, have her do all the work instead of just dominating with dominance. So, like, her high res allowed her to win a lot of matchups against tome units. So, yeah, just a very good unit. Very awesome. Mystic Boost was really cool at the time, too. So, pretty good. Alright, now this is the guy I was alluding to earlier. Remember when I said Surtur was my hard carry? Surtur and Legendary Tiki just pulled their weight so well in Arena. Then this guy came along and ruined everything. It's like everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Except in this case, it's Crom attacking. So, to change fate, to say this is overtuned would be an understatement. First of all, it scores 500 SP, and it's reposition plus, essentially. You can repo and then take a second action. I don't think I need to explain how devastating that was for the Arena landscape. Just being able to reposition units and still have an action. So it essentially turned Arena maps into like makeshift Aether Raids maps. It was like you were fighting defense teams that were setting up rally traps and dance traps and so on. You really had to be cautious around this guy. Otherwise, he would wipe out a unit with relative ease. Mind you, also, Arena at the time was so dominated by armors, and this guy had armor effectiveness, and he would just blow up every armor. So you really, really had to be careful. Or if you weren't a whale and you didn't have like non-armor arena viable units, you were in so much trouble. So yeah, he's a very annoying unit for that reason, but I couldn't beat him, so I joined him. I got him to plus 10 myself, and I never looked back, pretty much. So yeah, this guy, I love him and hate him at the same time. He's one of those units that will always be remembered either in a negative way or a positive way, depending on whether or not you had him or you had to fight him. Alright, next up we have Maritza over here, the original God Sword. Believe it or not, there was once a time when there was only one God Sword, and it was her. So when this unit came out, we were just awestruck by what she was able to do. Her weapon has -1 special trigger, all stats up 5, and null follow-up. Now, that doesn't sound very impressive right now, right? Like, you could probably get all of that out of one passive skill. But, mind you, this was a simpler time when weapons didn't do 5 million things. So, Maritza being able to do that much, the -1 gave her utility to run whatever special she wanted. You could go for Noontime, you could go for Soul, you could go for Gale Force. Just a lot of tricks up her sleeve. She's kind of like a Felix from back in the day. Like Brave Felix, but OG. If I could explain her to the audience that has only started playing recently. So, yeah, this was really the blueprint for God Swords. Just have null follow-up, have a lot of stats, have -1 special trigger, and damage reduction. So this was the introduction of dodge-based skills. So Close Call 3 gives you speed-based damage reduction if you're faster than the enemy. That was a brand new thing back then. So being able to convert speed into damage reduction, like speed becomes defense, that was a very new thing at the time, and we were not ready for it, really. I don't even know if we're ready for it now. Just damage reduction is dominating the game so much. But yeah, this unit was the God Sword. She could do everything, player phase, enemy phase, just you name it. Gale Forcing, everything was on the table for her. She was really a jack of all trades. And then finally, towards the end of Book 4, we ended up getting the first Ninja Duo hero. Now, I don't think I need to explain this one, do I? So, the Ninja Duo skill, giving you a second action for free after you've acted once. This broke so many doors wide open, particularly for PvE content, I want to say, where this was really where Abyssal content started to take a nosedive in difficulty. When we were able to pop duo skills like this to just get a bunch of actions, pretty much one turn the enemies. A lot of people were using multiple copies of her, because we also got a free copy from the Hero Rises event. So you could run 2 copies of Ninja Lin, have them both have their duo skill ready, have them Wings of Mercy to each other if you wanted to, have a Dancer with Wings of Mercy, and just obliterate all of the opponents in one turn. They used to call this Lin Force, pretty much. You could also run her in AR and do the same thing, just give her Disarm Trap, pretty much, and you were good to go. Like, if you had this unit back then, you beat the game. That's the easiest way I could put it. So, very, very incredible unit there. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to Book 5 now. Now, Book 5 is really where the power creep thing started getting out of hand. I remember, I don't have her in my Hall of Fame here. We're going to look at her as an honorable mention, but I remember when Regan dropped and she had Kanto 3, I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Considering how small the maps are in this game, you're giving Kanto 3 now? And just the way that Kanto works, it's like, man, you could essentially have Regan work as a makeshift Crom, because this guy's main claim to fame was to change fate. And you could just have Regan use reposition and then Kanto away. It's essentially like having to change fate. You repo and then move again. Like, it's just insane utility when it comes to positioning, and Book 5 really blew the doors open with that. And this guy, of course, is the guy who started all of that Pathfinder bonus movement mumbo-jumbo. It's thanks to him that they had to emergency nerf Aether Raid's defense by setting up the safety fence. Had they not done that, I think this guy would probably still be dominating. But they had the decency to be like, okay, we actually goofed. So we're going to release the safety fence now that gives you guys a free turn. Otherwise, you're going to get demolished by Sigurd on his turn 1 traps in Aether Raid's defense. It was very annoying. Back then, Elder V was still playing the game too, so he broke the door wide open on that with the turn 1 trap with Sigurd, and my god, man, I miss Elder V so much. One of the most insightful minds at playing Fae, especially defense. I learned a lot about the way interactions work from just watching his videos. So yeah, this guy, he was way overtuned on release. He might have been like, not only was he the best unit in the game on release, he felt like he was 10 times better than the next best unit. So a very unfair release there, but in true Sigurd fashion, yeah, they kind of nailed it from how good he is in FE4. All right, then we have Fallen Edelgard. This is the Scrub Lord's favorite unit. If you like walked around, let's say Reddit was a real place and there was a gathering of a bunch of people there, if you just walked around interviewing random people and said, okay, so who is the best Fire Emblem Heroes unit of all time, they probably would just say this, Fallen Edelgard. And I mean, yeah, at the time of release, yeah, she was really good, but she had a lot of flaws, of course. Anything with no follow-up would just body her, which I think a lot of people really overlook that fact for some reason. Now, she did have a crazy amount of sustain. She was one of the first units to just have ridiculous sustain for no reason. Her weapon healed her, and then not too long after that, or even before that, we had the Mystic Boost Seal. So they would combo that with her weapon and just heal, like, ridiculous amounts. 13 HP, you had no way to... If you had no null follow-up, you actually could not get rid of her. So that was really annoying. And thanks to her ability to take a bunch of extra actions, you could just run Gale Force on her as well and have her just get triple actions there. Armored Stride, give her an extra action if she or extra movement if she's not adjacent to anybody. So that could also be real annoying for arena mode and so on and so forth. This is a very good unit. I just think the community has a very jaded opinion of her because, first of all, it's Edelgard, of course, and it's a Fallen Edelgard, too. Like we said earlier with Fallen Robin, like, the Fallen heroes, for some reason, just generate a lot of hype. It's very edgy to get the theme of evil characters. So I think a lot of people are just jaded a little bit on how good she was. Mind you, she was very good, but the way people talk about her back then, they make it sound like she was significantly better than this guy, who they had to emergency nerf with the safety fence, like I said. But that wasn't quite the case with this unit. She had a lot of answers, and further answers just kept on getting pumped out on every banner to deal with her. So if you were losing to her a lot back in the day, that's kind of on you, to be honest. Just run null follow-up, like I said. All right, next up we have Katria, who, if I'm being honest, she's still kind of good even right now. The truth of the matter is just giving triangle attack support to allies is pretty busted. Just letting any unit get the ability to Brave Attack with whatever weapon they've got. There's a very good reason why Brave weapons are very nerfed. Like, they have low might, first of all. Or if they're getting a Brave Attack, they have to go through, like, 10 hoops to get it. Like in the case of... What was that one bow that had... The bow from Elincia, the Summer Elincia. She had one that gives you Brave Attack if you meet a bunch of conditions. I think you need, like, 10 more speed than the enemy and so on. So, yeah, like... Brave attacking is not something that we're supposed to be able to get easily, and Katria just gives it to everybody. In a very good way, too. It's allies that, if you have 2 allies in 2 spaces with the triangle attack status, you're able to get your Brave Attack there. So it's very positioning friendly, more so than Dual Strike, where you got to be adjacent. So, yeah, that aged really well. Also, she gives warping if that wasn't good enough, so allies can warp around. This was at a time, by the way, when there was no guidance 4 or soaring guidance, so people were running actual air orders and ground orders instead, just to be able to get the warp mobility. And Katria just gave it for free to allies in 2 spaces. So it's not really difficult to see why this unit was so incredible on release, and even way after that into the future. So yeah, very good unit. Very annoying on Aether Raid's defense, dealing with Katria balls. And just very good pretty much everywhere. Even right now, I would say, to a degree, she's still pretty good. All right, next up we have Henriette and the introduction of save skills. Of course, that save banner was... A lot of people cite that banner as being the most meta-impactful banner of all time. Of course, we also got Duo Lif on that banner, who... made my boy Bravite go extinct pretty much. RIP. But also on that banner, we got the save skills, which this was a huge deal back then. Being able to not have to rely on Omni tanks, because of course Cav lines were very popular for Aether Raid's defense back then. And the reason why is because the Cav lines would go around your Omni tank and attack the back row. Not the case if you got save skills, right? You can just protect all your allies with one tank and not have to worry about getting jumped from all directions. So it's not hard to see why far save and near save were really impactful skills, and they still are even to this day. They've even gotten a sudden rise again with recent buffs to armors. So yeah, hard to deny the relevance of the first banner that introduced these save skills, and Henriette, of course. All right, and then we have Yuri. I think this wraps us up for Book 5. We talked about Kanto lightly when I mentioned Regan, but this guy really accentuated all of the issues with Kanto and mobility. It's no surprise when Summoner Duels finally dropped, this guy was the best unit in the game. He has no power at all. He has, like, no potential when it comes to combat. All he gets is attack and speed up 6 and -1 special trigger. That's it. Then he gets +1 movement, and he gets Kanto 2, and believe it or not, that's the reason why he was so good. It's almost like movement is good. Who would have thought, right? Like, movement is the #1 power in Fire Emblem. So him being able to do that, didn't matter what his DPS was, he didn't care. As long as he could snipe something and then get out of the way, you could win. So yeah, Yuri, for quite some time when Summoner Duels was first a thing, he was definitely the best unit in the game. All right, so that wraps us up for Book 5. Okay, let's move on now to Book 6 here. So this is where already we were like starting to see some crazy power creep, and now power creep is tuned up to 11 here. So we get Summer Edelgard. That summer banner with 3 houses characters was a very instrumental banner. Not only did we get the summer lords, like we got Claude, Dimitri, and also Edelgard. We got Micaiah as well, who's a pretty good unit. But the summer Claude on that banner in particular was like one of the best demotes ever. I'm sure that summer banner made a lot of money for them, and this Edelgard definitely was the exemplary unit of that batch, because she could play all sorts of different roles. You could run her as a Gale Forcer with Charge, Assault Troop. This was a really good skill back then. Raging Storm, of course, getting a bunch of bonus actions, then giving her Gale Force to get more bonus actions, or you could play her defensively, because she's got really good defenses. You could just give her safe skill and have her do that. So a very wide variety of options for her, and again, just like Edelgard is a very popular character, so a lot of people were happy about that. All right, next up we have Embla here. Now, I'm surprised I wasn't able to slide Veronica in here. Veronica and Embla both came out on the same banner. They were both red sharing, and as dominating as Veronica was, Legendary Veronica, she was definitely the best player phaser for a while on release, but that Severance, man. Severance was so grossly overpowered that it's still good right now. Now that armored units are coming back, so is Embla. Like, you're able to just turn off their saves and then make a mockery out of them. So this unit is really good. The answer to saves, as we saw, Book 5 brought the problem, and then they sold us a solution, which is something pretty common that Insys likes to do, but I ain't complaining. Also, Embla herself is one of my favorite final bosses that we fought in the series, so really good stuff there. We have, of course, the New Year Dagger. This unit, being able to pop Pathfinder and give it to your whole team. Like, come on, man. That's so unfair. As if Pathfinder on one unit isn't already good enough. How about just give it to the whole party? This unit was part of one of the most devastating archetypes of teams in Summoner Duels for a very long time. Pretty much the Pathfinder daisy chain. You just pop your Pathfinder with her on turn 1, and then extend your reach all the way into the enemy's face and just delete them. It was really annoying. You could push them out of the box in the middle, like, just gain territory advantage, and they're never able to get back into the game, pretty much. You box them out. So, this unit, very grossly overpowered, very overpowered duo skill. Still probably the best duo skill if I want to be honest. I mean, we have a lot of combat-based duo skills that are really good, but remember what we said about Sigurd, right? Legendary Sigurd. Mobility is king. Movement is the best thing in the game. So giving everyone Pathfinder, of course, is very good. All right, then we have Brave Seliph over here. Now, this guy, of course, he is the son of the guy. It's like the second coming of Legendary Sigurd, honestly. This dude was so cracked. We had never seen anything like him. He was one of the first units to really come with absurd amounts of true damage. It's 40% of the enemy's defense. You think that's enough? In a time where no one had true damage like that at all? Like, if you had true damage, you barely had it. It was like 7 points. We're not talking like 40% of whatever the enemy's defense is, probably 60 and up. So, he was pretty nuts. Not only that, he was hard to get rid of because he had Miracle as well. So, yeah, this guy, he was very dominant. He could play a lot of roles, too. You could run AoEs on him, which was really good for a while. You could run Distant Counter on him because, of course, he's got the Miracle. You could run healing skills on him, like Surge Sparrow was kind of cool for a while. The Mystic Boost Seal, and so on and so forth. This guy was insane. Very overpowered. I think it wasn't even until Emblem where I thought he had fallen below another unit. I thought Emblem... It took that long for a unit to actually overthrow this guy, in my opinion. And then finally, we have Ash, who is a free-to-play character. Yeah, the only free-to-play character that I even have in, or a free-to-play hero that we got from the book that I have in the Hall of Fame. And the reason why is because her C-skill. This was Guidance 4 before Guidance 4. So, of course, you guys already know how effective that is. Just being able to warp 2 spaces to an ally is nuts. Giving you so much reach on your other allies. And she was a really good opening unit to have this too, because her defenses are solid. You could throw her in the front lines. She's not likely to die to melee attacks. Have your armored unit in 2 spaces of her with far save, so she doesn't have to worry about ranged attacks. And then she just provides a warping beacon that the enemies can't really get rid of. So, not only was she good in 8th raids, she was good in summoner duels for a very long time. She actually was like a legitimate top 10 unit in the game, which is, I don't think any of the other free book heroes have been that good. So we definitely have to sing our praises to Ash. Also, she's a rock star. If you guys saw the video there from April Fool's Day. All right, moving on now to book 7 here. Or is this book 6? I think I lost track. I think this is book 7, right? Okay, so we have Legendary Male Robin here. This guy, of course, changed the game. We were running Bonus Doubler as our means to get status up, but when this guy came out, he changed the game. Who needs Bonus Doubler when you can just stack Unity? So he gives Grand Strategy. He also debuffs your whole team by whatever their highest stat is, and then he debuffs himself as well. So you're able to really make good use of that Grand Strategy. And then you can also stack that with Unity on your other allies to get even more stats. It was really annoying dealing with this guy in pretty much all the modes. Summoner duels, he was, of course, very good. Just being essentially like a party-wide team buffer with this. And then if you were trying to debuff the enemies, you would just get a middle finger to the face with them all having Unity. He was also really good in 8th Raids 2 with Kanto Control, of course. One of the premier skills to be running in that mode. So yeah, this guy... he's very good. He's also a really cool character. Everyone likes Robin. Everyone likes Awakening. So, nothing can go wrong when you combine those things. All right, then we have Ophelia, who I think she is, out of all of the rearmed heroes, I could have had the first rearmed hero in here, who was Arcane Lif, but he didn't really feel Hall of Fame worthy, because he himself was kind of sucky, and his weapon was also kind of sucky, even though it was our introduction to arcane weapons. This was the first time when we were like, oh, okay, that's an arcane hero. So, Special Spiral 4 allows any unit to just nullify DR. This was very important back in the day, because not a lot of units were having DR piercing, and let alone full-on DR piercing with Special Spiral, which was already a really good effect. And then you get +5 true damage, too. It's like, you can't get better than this back in the day. Like, this was nuts. And to have it on a unit that could duplicate it at the same time, it was like getting your cake and being able to eat it too. It was nuts, right? Like this unit, very impactful. Her weapon was very good for fodder too, allowing you to get some cooldown reduction for whatever you were up to. Like any ally being able to get that, like for example, cavalry types, which are not able to get pulse effects very easily, you could just give them Arcane Eclipse there, and you were pretty much set for life. Like this Ophelia was... She definitely felt, to me, the most impactful arcane hero on release. Every build was running Special Spiral 4 for a very long time, up until we got other DR piercing effects like physical null follow-up, magic null follow-up, and tempo 4, and so on and so forth. Before all of that, it was Special Spiral 4. Okay, next up we've got King Freyr, who even today is still really good, and it's all because of his C skill. He is the ultimate penalty cleanser. Just being able to clean any debuffs the enemies are trying to do. That includes Elamine, who this guy retired entirely. She no longer has a job. She's homeless because of him. So, King Freyr, I don't know why you had to do Elamine that dirty, but it is what it is. He's also pretty solid in combat. Maybe not so much anymore, but back in the day, for sure, he was... Not only did he penalty cleanse, but then he was insane at melee combat. He was kind of like Ector Deer at the time. Like, what Ector Deer is able to do right now was what this guy was basically doing back in the day. Like, just a crazy good, tanky, melee cavalry type that also had additional effects for support and ally help. So, he was really good. He was definitely the best Anima Mythic hero, pretty much the best defense Mythic hero for a very long time. He still is really good. So, yeah, he definitely stood the test of time, and he is Freya's big brother. So, that's even more bonus points for him. All right, next up we have Wind Tribe Claude, a unit who I'm actually not very high on. I'm going to be honest with you guys, when this dude first dropped, all I thought of was just Attack and Speed Prime 4 fodder. Now, he does get points because he introduced that skill, and that was a power crept distant counter like we never saw before. Power crept from a power crept distant counter, which was the distant solo skills. They didn't even have time to shine before we got this in their face. It was crazy. Like, they just power crept distant counter almost every other banner back then. Now we have, like, distant bonus doubler and close bonus doubler and so on. They're still continuing to power creep distant counter even today. But yeah, this was nuts. At the time, crazy being able to get this. And then he also was a really good player phaser too. He had a lot of DR on initiation. He could easily get to his lethality. He ramped into it. He had like a Rally Spectrum effect where he just gets to his lethality on the first and second hit for free, basically. So there weren't too many there were weaknesses to him a lot, right? Like, you could run Lucia, for example, turn off specials, and then he's a sitting duck. Or you could have your armored units with non-pierceable DR, such as Aegis, for example, with Hardy Fighter, and they'd be able to tank him. Or you could also go for Armored Flow at the time, giving you DR based on res, and then you would run Special Spiral 4. So you tank him, and then you nullify his DR on the counter, and you blow him up. So he definitely had his weaknesses. That's why I'm not very fond of him, but I do understand what the community thinks. So I think he does deserve to be in the FEH Hall of Fame at the very least. And then finally, we also have Legendary Hinoka, probably my favorite unit from this generation. Now, she didn't hold up too well, mainly because we're getting more and more movement and like warping effects that are better than what she does. But at the time, nothing was doing this. She gives charge to all your flying allies in 2 spaces. Of course, flying units already have superior mobility. They can move over obstacles and mountains and rivers and so on. So giving them charge was pretty dirty. Like, you could basically cover the entire map. And she invented her own team archetype at the time, which was the Flyer Ball. Or the Flyer Line, rather. So, yeah. This unit was really cool. She grants a lot of support, too. Her C skill does a massive debuff, like Crux-style debuff on the enemies. If they're in 3 columns or 3 rows centered on her, they take, attack, speed, and defense -5. I still, to this day, don't even know why that's there. Like, was it not good enough that she gives the charge and the special ramp support? Did she really need to do a debuff to the enemies too? It's just so crazy. Really good unit. She didn't age the greatest because we got more units that do what she does but better. But for the time, can't be denied. She definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. And finally, we come to Book 8, which is not completely done yet. There's still... the night is still young when it comes to Book 8. But for the time being, I think we have a decent enough Hall of Fame for now. Of course, Emblem Ike, probably my most hated release ever. I hate this guy. I'm an Ike fan. I hate this guy. I don't know what they were thinking with him. He's way, way too good. And what's bad about it is that not only is he OP, but he's just too easy to use. Like, you would just put him in front and then he just wins. No thought behind it whatsoever. Just demolish everything without having to think. He's the ultimate eat glue unit. Basically, Brave Ike times 10 with very little weaknesses. And for whatever reason, they double down on him every banner. It's like every time we get something new, a new Emblem ring, a new C-slot passive, it's always better for him. For whatever reason, he wins every single time. It's the opposite effect of Fallen Edelgard, where every banner had a counter to her. Nah, this guy, every banner, he just gets better. Because why not? Right now, he's very manageable. He's not like what he was when he released, which was just the slayer of Aether Raids. Aether Raids was not fun when this guy was on top. But now it's gotten more manageable. He has more counters now. But I don't know what to say. And then, to top it all off, he brought this skill too, Lagu's Friend, which is by far the best B skill in the game. It's not even close, right? Like, if you can run Lagu's Friend, you probably want to. Okay, next up we have Emblem Celica as well. Now, on the opposite of Ike, where he dominated the game as a unit, Celica dominated the game as an emblem ring. Her ring is... I don't know if I would say it's the best ring right now, because of course we have the Sigurd ring, but this was definitely one of the better rings, and being able to allow allies to warp the distance that ring does, where it's up to... You can warp to an enemy in 5 spaces. So for melee types, such as armors, that gives them so much extra mobility. It scales a little bit down depending on what movement type you give it to. Like, calves get a little bit less. Infantry gets a decent amount, and then, of course, armors would get the most. But it's just so stupid, and it really changed Arena. Because you have to pay attention now. Every single match, you got to check who has that Celica ring. Otherwise, you're going to get jumped and get attacked. So, a really annoying unit. People oversold how good she was herself, though. I don't think she was ever that great. I was always able to tank her very easily with pretty much whatever. Like, Valentine Murrah was really good. Also a save unit. Also, like, Atun Micaiah was around who could also tank her. But that ring, man. And the fact that you can give the ring to whoever you want. Very big deal. Very pivotal release here. Alright, next up we've got Duo Igreen, accompanied, of course, by Luis there. Now, these two baddies dominated the game for a very long time. I'm surprised that they actually fell off. When you look at what this unit does, the amount of support they give, the amount of damage potential that they had back in the day, and it's not really their fault either. Like, a lot of the counters that we ended up getting to them are only as a result of getting counters to this guy. So they were kind of a victim of that. Like, they're a victim of the countering to Duo Leon more so than countering them. But, man, this unit was really dominant. Being able to give +1 movement to infantry allies as well as armor types. Really powerful stuff there. They can pre-charge their AoE really easy, do a lot of damage with that. And then they've got really great skills here as well. Tempo 4, Pulse Up Blades just gets them extra charging. You wouldn't want to run Flash Sparrow. You probably want to give them, like, Life and Death or something, so they can just do more damage on the AoE. And their duo button's really gross, too. Giving Treachery to a unit that has AoEs already. Oh, man, that's a game ender right there. You pop that, and then you're pretty much deleting whatever you go after. So, a really, really pivotal and meta-defining unit for a long time. Like I said again, I'm still stunned that they actually ended up falling off, but... You can tank this guy for that. This asshole right here. I don't think any unit ever in this game's lifespan caused more people to quit than him. right? Like, the meta where he was the best unit in the game was not fun. And a lot of it has to do with his ability to just end actions so easily. We've had units that could do that before, like Fomortis and Satyr and so on, but they weren't doing it like this guy, where he could attack something. He's very likely to kill whatever he attacks anyway, because he had dumb amounts of melt damage. So he would blow up something, get a KO, then he would end someone else's action, giving you like a +2 from him being able to attack. Then you could even pop his duo skill to target however many enemies are lined up with him and end their turns as well. One of the dumbest releases they ever did. This was a dumb idea, just a dumb unit. Maybe not as dumb as this guy, but still really dumb and really unfun as well to fight against. If you mess up like once, if you make one little mistake, this guy would eat you alive. So yeah, now the good news though is that of course they countered him, and good riddance, right? Like, I don't want to see this guy ever again. So we got a lot of counters to him being able to do melt damage, and unfortunately that also nerfed AoE damage, but I mean, AoEs were kind of OP as well, so I guess it is what it is. Even though it's a byproduct of nerfing him, we can take that. And then finally, we have Summer Edelgard. It seems like we had an Edelgard for... what is it, like almost every year there's an Edelgard in here. We got Brave Edelgard, we got Fallen Edelgard, Summer Edelgard, and now, of course, we're wrapping this up with Winter Edelgard. That Winter banner was the first... I mean, Book 5 started the power creep, and then this one... This was where power creep got up-tuned to 11. This banner here. When we got Yunaka, we got Edelgard, we got Claude, and then... Or not Claude, we had... Who is it? The Duo Byleth, and then we also had Dimitri. That banner was such a clinic in terms of fodder, in terms of unit power, and all of the above. We've never seen it like that, and for good reason. This was actually the second most viewed trailer that I think I ever did, behind only the very first Fallen banner that we talked about earlier. So it seems like people really like to see this game spiral out of control. They like seeing the power creep, and equally so, they like Three Houses and Edelgard. So, yeah, she was really good, really dominant Gale Force option for the time. And now she's very power crept. There's better options. But for the time, it was pretty wild. And she also sets up the Flame Tiles, which is still one of the best terrain effects you can get. So now, let's quickly go ahead and recap here. We went on for an hour. I told you guys to strap yourselves in at the start, right? But let's just quickly finish off by taking a look at some honorable mentions here. I'm not going to go super in-depth here, but yeah, we do see in Book 5, this is really where the power creep took a tone for the worst. When Regan introduced Kanto, Not had Pathfinder, and then this Fjorm introduced Hardy Fighter, which was like the resurgence of armors at that time. Now we have another one over here with the introduction of Shield Fighter, but man, I think really Book 5 was when they went a little too far with the effects and so on. Let's see here. Anything else of note? Book 2, of course, I tried to mention the armored units on that seasonal banner, but we got them again later, really early on the Fallen Heroes anyway, so even though that Christmas banner did introduce a lot of power creep with the passives, we would get it back again later anyway. Book 1, we got this Xander here. People may not know this guy too well, but he came with Infantry Pulse. He was the originator of that skill. Ike, I think the original release of Ike was actually... This may have been the best-selling banner in the history of FEH. Maybe not. Like, I don't want to spit facts that are not facts, but it definitely felt like it at the time. Because Ike was not a day one character. He wasn't in the game on release. So people were waiting on him to get added, and we're talking year one FEH here, of course, when the game was pretty much at its peak of popularity and had the widest player base. So we're also talking about the first introduction of the most popular character at the time as well. Yeah, I'm pretty sure his banner did really good. So yeah, this was a very influential release too. Tib Arn's release was pretty influential. Like I said, he had Sturdy Impact, which was the first skill that I thought made Bold Fighter question itself at the top. But also just the introduction of Lagoo's units too. Because we had all been waiting. We were like, oh, when are we going to get beast characters in the game? And then finally we got them. We got Tib, and probably the best batch we could have got. We ended up getting Tibarn, we got Kanegas, we got, like, all the awesome ones. We got Nasala as the GHB as well. That was a time to be alive. I was so stunned. And they actually made the Laguz Royals feel as powerful as they did in Radiant Dawn, too. Because Tibarn was the best Gale Forcer for a while. And then, like, Kanegas was an awesome armored unit, too. So, yeah, they did a great job with that release. Anything else? I'm just really, like, skimming through here. I'm looking for anything of note. Because I think we covered most of it, but, like, a lot of this stuff is honorable mentions. Can you believe it took us 8 books to get Nurgle? Like, the original villain for a lot of players that started with FE7, that's how long it took to get the main bad guy in here. At least they nailed it when they finally added him. He's badass as hell. But, man, they couldn't have added him earlier. It's just really wonky. And there's no Athos still either. That's another problem. And then Brave Felix. Of course, Brave Felix is probably going to be in the Hall of Fame at some point. But right now, it's hard to put him over these guys that have been out for longer. And they definitely left a bigger impact on the meta than... Who knows what Felix's impact is going to be. He's still... He's not very old. He's only like a month or two old at this point. So he still has time to simmer in the pot. These guys, they did their jobs for the time, and they left their marks already. So that's going to wrap us up for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane. I know it was a long one, but we went like podcast style with that one. So if you guys just like listening to FEH content, like reliving the past, the memories of the good old days, then I hope we were able to cover some of that here. So that's going to wrap us up. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I will catch y'all again on the flip side.